perspective of those departments.
Welcome, Joe. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. Tonight we're going to go over the fire dashboard. You should have a copy in your packet. Am I doing this right?
Go back to the Zoom meeting
Oh, Zoom.
and then kind of hover over your share screen. And then find yours. Yep, right there. And then click share. Oh, that works.
Okay.
And then now you can go.
Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay. The first two slides, of which there are 7, should look pretty familiar. They're our typical dashboard that we've been doing for a number of quarters now. In the top line across the top, you'll see our 90th percentile times for turnout, for travel, and then total response times. The numbers above the line are the number of incidents that didn't meet the response time or travel time or turnout time criteria, and the numbers below are the ones that did. The middle column, there's total call volume and effective response force times. And then in the bottom right, we have some comparisons of automatic aid given to jurisdictions and then automatic aid that we've received from those jurisdictions. The second slide across the top shows calls dispatched by station and total call volume by call type on those two. And you can see that since first quarter of 2017, they've remained pretty stable. We don't see any trends really increasing in those. Calls meeting the turnout target by type and calls meeting the travel target by type are in the center 2. We do see a little downtick on turnout times in the first quarter of 2020 in this quarter, and we believe that has to do with the fact that we're now donning 4 pieces of personal protective equipment when we go on EMS calls, so that's our MEG. Fire inspections stopped essentially in February, middle of February, when the COVID-19 struck. We have begun discussions to reinstitute those, and our idea is to inspect multifamily businesses first with engine companies, because we can still maintain social distancing, and the fact that people are staying home more make those occupancies a little higher risk, and so we want to make sure that we protect the folks that are in those buildings. This next slide is kind of the COVID situational awareness for Kirkland, and you'll notice in February and March on the bottom right, the yellow graph, the real heavy yellow was occurring in February and March. Now these aren't specifically COVID calls. We haven't until recently had a code that we could track that, but what they are calls that are related to COVID or COVID-like. So shortness of breath, fever, COPD, dyspnea. So any of those calls that could be COVID are tracked in the yellow below. And then the map above just shows the kind of the hot spots. Most of those red spots are where we had multiple COVID calls, and most of those are adult family care units. So these type of calls, we've had 298 since the 1st of January. There's been 13. That number's a little bit misleading because it is the number of calls that we knew were COVID before we were dispatched. It's not the total number of COVID patients that we've actually seen. So you can see also that the good news is in April, the call volume for COVID symptom-related calls are dropping. The next, another way that we look at COVID-type responses is NORCOM tags facilities and they tag call types, whether we need to use PPE or not on the call. And so they'll add a sentence or two in the dispatch information that says that they recommend or advise full PPE. And you can see beginning of March when this started, the recommendations started to go up. And even in the recommendations, you can see that it's kind of tapering off. I believe this information is through April 27th, so it's pretty close to today without the last week. So this is premise information that NORCOM also gives us of the number of facilities. Most of those are, again, adult family care compared to our neighbors. So Bellevue has 42 facilities that generate premise information with a PPE advisory. Kirkland has 18, and you can see the rest of the jurisdictions on how many they have. And the map up there indicates where those facilities are located. Our next one has to do with how are we doing on personal protective equipment and disinfectants and cleaners for decon. And this is building F, and this is some of our stockpile. All of this is either masks or gowns or gloves or some type of disinfectant or cleaner. A couple more shots. Building F. So we do have enough for the time being. Actually, Kirkland is in a better spot than most of our neighbors with regard to PPE. We can't say that we could survive another pandemic like the last 2 months, like if it resurged in the fall, but we can say that we're continuing to try to stock up. We think we could get through it, but we're continuing to order and find sources that have materials and get them shipped. And the one last one I wanted to show you was we have these decontamination chambers that are made with ultraviolet light. And the slide on the left shows you the size of them. They're 3 by 3 by 3. And then on the inside of a close-up one, you can see the bulbs. We'd hang our N95 masks, our goggles, any other equipment that might need decon. And you put them in there for about 90 seconds, turn the lights on, and when you're done, they're decontaminated. The police also got a couple of these, and the size accommodates their gun belts and some of their equipment that is a little bigger than what fire typically takes in and uses. So that's my presentation. Any questions?
I do have one question, Joe.
Okay.
When you talk about, I can't remember the number from the report, but 2,900 visits, right? Does that 29 equal 3 sets of PPE? Each one?
Is it on one of these slides?
The
I'm not
number
sure.
of, yeah.
One more back. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
22. So is that 3 sets of PPE for all 3 folks on the?
Yes, and now this 2,900 or 2,300 essentially is for all the jurisdictions that NORCOM dispatch for. So you're right, it would be generally 3 sets, although we do have some protocols that we call sending in a scout. So on a number of these calls, we'll send one person in that remains in visual sight of the rest of the crew. One person goes in full PPE, makes a quick assessment, puts a mask on the patient, and if we don't think it's COVID related or has any of those flu-like symptoms, and the other 2 can come in without donning PPE. So we are trying to do some things, some innovative things that save it. So we won't use it at the same rate we did for the first month of the COVID pandemic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Council, any other questions? Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Chief. Couple questions. What can we not decontaminate in those decontamination chambers? So you could put your goggles in and your N95. So of course not gloves. Anything else that?
Well, the gloves really haven't been a problem. We have plenty of those.
Okay.
I think they actually could be deconned if you could get all surfaces, exposed. The problem with is they crinkle all up.
Right, trying to get them off, they turn
Yeah.
inside out. So
But
okay.
pretty much every other thing, the goggles, the masks, the gowns would be the same sort of problems with the gloves.
Okay.
And actually gowns are where are probably our weak point in
Okay.
stockpiling supplies.
That was sort of my next question. The picture that you had of our supplies. Of course, when you look at it, it looks like a ton of supplies, but you're saying that there's likelihood it won't be enough if we have another surge in the fall. Is that all what you're showing in that image? Is that all resupply? Did we use up the majority of our stockpile?
Those photos were taken today.
Okay.
Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah.
We used some of our stockpile, but we still have some existing. We did buy, particularly N95 masks. We did buy quite a big stockpile for the last SARS outbreak, and we still had some of that. And then we've got some from the county, not as much as we have needed. And that's kind of why we're worried about it, is that the county supply has shut off. So we're working hard to try to make sure we have enough for the next, if there's a resurgence.
Yeah. And I'm grateful that we had the stockpile to start out with.
So are we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
So we're thinking we'll go next to the police dashboard, and then we'll come back to my COVID-19 update. So is our Chief of Police, Sherry Harris.
Welcome, Sherry. Good to see you.
It's hard to follow Joe, yes.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor Arnold, and council members. It's good to see you too. I've actually been watching while I'm at home on Tuesday nights, so have been following you. And before I start my presentation, I just wanted to advise that this is National Corrections Officer Appreciation Week, and take a moment to acknowledge the Kirkland Corrections officers who have been tirelessly working to ensure the safety and security of our jail and customers that they serve.
That's awesome.
Banana bread tomorrow.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We really appreciate your support, not just today, but over the last 2 months. I'm incredibly proud to talk about the department's response to COVID-19. I'm going to start out the presentation that way. I have 12 slides, but I promise that this will go fast. Having the first police and firefighters exposed to COVID-19, we have had calls from across the country asking about how are we protecting our officers, how have we changed the way we're doing business, and one very shocking question has been, are Kirkland police officers coming to work? What are you doing to ensure they're showing up for work? We've had absolutely no issues with any of our staff coming into work. While non-essential staff are working at home and detectives are split into 2 teams rotating in and out of the office, our corrections officers and patrols officers are here every day. In fact, we keep encouraging them to take more time off, but there is really, truly a sense of duty to the community and to each other that really speaks to the character of our employees. The first slide that I have for you today, I have never in my 27 years in law enforcement had to track this statistic. I can't even say it. In collaboration with the fire department and King County Public Health, like the chief told you, we are now tracking locations that have COVID-19 positive patients. NORCOM also is providing alerts when they're dispatching an officer to any of these locations, and then they're asking additional 911 callers questions that they can then help guide officers in the use of PPE. Officers have all been issued N95 masks, eye protection, gloves, and gowns. While this equipment typically was in the trunk of their patrol car in a red bag, it's now in their pockets or hanging from their vest or on glasses on top of their head. We have surgical masks that can be provided to anyone who is symptomatic when they encounter on a call. We're not currently requiring them to wear them all the time, but they are encouraged to put them on anytime that they feel that they need to use this equipment. We're making more phone calls on non-emergency calls, and we're encouraging online reporting. We still prioritize people calls, assaults, disturbances, but we do ask people to come outside of their home when we can. We are practicing social distancing both in the department and the field. A little harder in the department. People feel comfortable. It's like it's their home, right? But still working really hard to spread people out. Officers are visible in traffic complaint zones, but have been asked to restrict contact to behavior that's dangerous to the public. I will say that actually one of our lieutenants stopped a motorcycle for 71 miles an hour on Northeast 124th last week. So everyone is being very careful and looking out for fast traffic. Similar to other agencies, we're also restricting bookings in the jail to mandatory arrests and serious offenses. We have instituted health checks twice a day of inmates and increased the frequency of cleaning in our facility. Corrections officers are closely screening inmates at intake for any illness and have the same PPE as officers have in the field. We've received incredible support from the Kirkland Fire Department command staff, their health officer, and the emergency manager. We are now able to self-decontaminate our cars and our uniform and our equipment when needed. Kind of a different time for law enforcement that we've never really paid a lot of attention to. Maybe in a meth lab, maybe in a seriously biohazard situation, but now this is a daily occurrence. Our first recorded PPE calls, you can see, while this data is from January 1st, the first recorded PPE calls were in March. And again, this screen is only showing you the calls that have advised the use of PPE, not necessarily when officers are actually using them on their own. We've had about 18 officers in quarantine or isolation because of exposure to COVID, but knock on wood, all have tested negative. I've also had a lot of questions about the kind of calls we're receiving, and I was able to get just the top 5 incidents from NORCOM. They're being initiated by patrol officers. These calls are almost always, again, initiated by a patrol officer. It's not a 911 call. This is just the first quarter, but you can see there's still a lot of traffic stops and officers making contact, proactively walking downtown. That's really what directed patrol is when they're going out in the parks or they're walking downtown or through the library garage. Assists are kind of a multitude of calls. But as its name implies, its officers are providing assistance to someone in the community or the fire department or another police agency without necessarily being associated with the crime. So that's kind of something new that we haven't really showed you in the past. I'll be interested to see what it's like in the second quarter when we pick up some of April, but still pretty busy. So you saw the dashboard in your packet, and overall calls for service are down, and so is every category, but aggravated assault. And while the crime dashboard is a broad overview of crime, this category encompasses a number of crimes, but they're all serious felony assaults. You remember that we had a shooting in Juanita by a subject who we thought was trying to carjack the vehicle's owner, but it turned out the suspect was stalking both the victim and his girlfriend. This case was solved by detectives with the use of PROACT officers who actually caught the suspect in the act of stalking that couple. Most of the offenses in this category are actually involve physical violence. So I did check on that. I know there were some questions about how many cases involving guns did we have, and while there were several of them, most of them were actually physical violence. So we're still working on what to include in the dashboard for the PROAC unit. But I wanted to share some cases that they've investigated in the first quarter. If you remember, their goals are to reduce reoccurring crime and the crime trends in the city by using both traditional and innovative investigative techniques through partnerships and teamwork. This incident column are the cases that they have assisted patrol or detectives in solving, and it would also include outside agencies. There are a number of times since the inception that they come into work with a plan for what they're going to do with their day, but they end up being reassigned when there's an active investigation that needs plainclothes officers for surveillance, or we need them to go interview a witness in another jurisdiction. The cases column are actually all the cases that they are assigned. Basically, they're doing all the work on those. In the dashboard, we had 49 burglaries in the first quarter, both commercial and residential. And I just wanted to point out that the PROAC unit has assisted or investigated 29 of those cases between the incident and the cases numbers there. And just one highlight of one case, and they've done, again, a number of burglaries, but there were 2 residential burglaries that resulted in identifying 5 subjects that were involved in either the actual burglary or trafficking the stolen property afterwards. While conducting surveillance of one of the suspects, they observed someone unrelated on a stolen motorcycle from Redmond. And they recovered that stolen property, arrested all 5 of the suspects who confessed to their involvement in the crimes, and were able to return the stolen property to owners. I should stop for a second. Does anybody have any questions on that? It's kind of new. Okay.
It's good.
So this week I've had quite a few questions about crime in March and April. And so our crime analyst has been collecting information on just the month of March and just the month of April. Both months have seen a reduction in activity in comparison to the previous 3-year average in domestic violence incidents. That was one question we had. But we've had an increase in online reporting, and we're encouraging that. And we've had an increase in mental health incidents. We do continue to have an MHP supporting, 2 MHPs supporting our community, working in the field with officers, responding to calls that are in progress, and conducting follow-ups with those who need mental health services. They're both right now working with us through grant funding through the state, through WASPIC. And we are continuing with the goal of hiring our own MHP through Proposition 1. We have not given up on that. While we didn't receive a response to our recent RFP, along with Leslie Miller's help, we have made personal contact with individuals and agencies still trying to recruit and hire in order to increase the service level in Kirkland. So I expect in the next couple of weeks that we'll be conducting at least one interview that I've had some contact with on a qualified applicant, if not more. In addition, we've experienced a significant increase in mail theft, and this is really what my slide is right here. We believe that this really is related to the stimulus checks being sent out and all the media hype that you saw that came out with that. We were getting bulletins from the U.S. Postal Service alerting us that this would be occurring, and they were seeing it in other parts of the country. Most of the targets were large community mailboxes. We have arrested 2 subjects that were caught in the act of committing mail theft, and then PROACT is also working on the rest of the cases. We're partnering with our neighboring agencies, sharing photos when we get them of vehicles and suspects, and they're doing the same. I did want to point out that if you're caught in the act of stealing mail, it's mail theft. If afterwards you're caught with someone else's mail, it's considered possession of stolen property. And we see that a lot in some of our PROACT cases. And then we see kind of other evidence that helps us develop identity theft, where people are stealing mail and finding credit cards and now trying to create IDs and bank accounts. So you can see that certainly in March, we had 50 cases. In the last 3 years in March, we've had nowhere near that many cases. So it's certainly been significant. And there have been bulletins that have gone out to the patrol officers. They're very aware of it, and being visible and doing their best to, they want to catch people in the act of this. It's fun for them. So this slide is not typically information that I would include in a quarterly dashboard, but I really believe that there's been a significant increase in the purchase of firearms, and it's directly related to the pandemic. I don't know why. I could not answer that question if you asked me, but March 1st through April 1st of 2020, all of March, all of April, there were 701 transfers. That means there are 701 firearms that were purchased in Kirkland. In comparison to 2019, that only had 270, and 2018 that only had 225. So all of these applications are processed by our police support associates. We typically would refer to them as the records unit. That's who you see when you come in through the lobby, through the front doors. But we are still continuing with our Proposition 1 gun safety program. It includes providing gun locks, and we have developed staff have developed a very entertaining, interactive presentation. It covers the safe handling of firearms, an overview of gun laws, and includes laws related to mental health and domestic violence as associated with guns. Officers have some great suggestions also for exposing young children to gun safety. I'm not sure when we'll be able to deliver this program in person, and so this week we've really been talking about how can we do this via Zoom like this, or can we do it, make a video and try to get it out via social media. We did do a social media warning to the public about securing firearms during the stay-at-home order and kids being out of school. And we included information on how to get a gun lock, and we had only 2 members of our community ask for those. So we'll be doing that periodically and see if there's other ways that we can get those out. So I'll stop again and see if you have any questions.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. So the next part of my presentation is I wanted to give you an update on what we've done to our website. We have always had a police officer complaint or a compliment complaint form, but it has not been very prominent. And so working with the city manager's office, we put together a tab on the left-hand side. We've got it circled here where it's more prominent. If you have a compliment or a complaint that you would like to file, you can do so electronically. And so it takes you to a page that kind of describes a little bit. I think you've received some of this information from the city manager on how to file a complaint and kind of what happens, and it also includes the Ombud program as well. So I'm actually going to be sneaky and have Jim.
We invited the Assistant City Manager, Jim Lopez, here to talk a little bit about the Ombud program and the changes we're making on the website related to that too. I would point out for the chief that they also converted us to a fillable form. So that's an improvement that we made recently. It used to be you had to print it off as a PDF and fill it out, but now you can actually fill it in from online.
Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, City Manager, Mayor Sweet, Deputy Mayor Arnold, and council members. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight, although I think I often stand too close to the camera. Thank you very much, Chief Harris. I'm going to speak very briefly about our Ombuds program, which we've really created much more external-facing exposure for in this website. But before I do, maybe a quick description of what an Ombud program is, because Ombud isn't the most descriptive term in the world. The Ombud program reviews the decisions and actions of city personnel in any department in the city. When a community member makes a complaint about a city staff person, the Ombud has the authority to evaluate the situation, document what occurred, and describe whether the situation fits into city policies, other applicable regulations, or expectations for constituent service. The Ombud has access to the city attorney, as well as outside legal resources or other professional services required to fully investigate and evaluate any complaint. The role of the Ombud is currently performed by the Assistant City Manager, myself, or our Communications Program Manager, Kelly Stickney. Essentially, the Ombud program is available to you if you're unsure about which department to file a complaint in. We can help you. If you believe you've received unfair treatment during an interaction with a city staff person, if you believe city staff has not provided you with quality customer service, you can call the Ombud. Or if you seek information about other agencies that could help you. So we kind of play multiple roles. So the outward-facing website is on your screen now. It sits in the city manager's office, and you could see we've pushed up the contact button to the communications program manager, so it's prominently displayed. And all you really need to do is click that email address and write your email to our office, and we will get a response to you promptly. Now, you can get to this program. We got some really good real estate on our landing page. So we put the Ombud's program link in the report and issue tile to make it as easy as possible for folks to have access to the program. And those are our upgrades in this quarter. And that's my report. Thank you, City Manager.
Just also first want to thank Jim Lopez and David Walbrecht for working very quickly on making these changes. Also the folks in IT who helped with the webpage. We're going to have further webpage upgrades with relationship to this as well, with a link from the council page and also a description about how people can contact the council and the relationship between the council, the city manager, and the Ombud program. So more to come, but we wanted to start rolling these things out as soon as we got them ready. So we just wanted to show you tonight what we've already done to make it more accountable and transparent to the public how you get this information.
Thank you.
Larry?
Any last questions for the chief before we come back to the city manager? We have
Councilmember Pascal.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief Harris, really comprehensive presentation. You actually answered a lot of, I think, some of the questions that I know I've been hearing from the community. So it's really helpful to have this. I guess though, I just have a quick question. One of the things we've been seeing is a lot of increase of usage, people out and about, either walking or biking, whether that's through our parks or along our waterfront or other roads, but also the CKC. I just was curious, how often are we able as officers, how often are they able to get out on bicycle patrol or, in that manner? I'm not familiar with how often we do that. I was just kind of curious if you could provide some background on that.
Sure. So, we've really adopted the slogan of keep moving. Stay home, be safe, but keep moving. And on nice weekends, we have had some dedicated bike patrol. We're right now doing additional training with bike patrol officers in the next month to ensure that we can deploy more of them throughout the summer. But I've spent some overtime on a couple of the nicer weekends to actually have officers that are dedicated just to working in the parks and asking people to make sure that they're social distancing when we're seeing, family groups gathered there. So that will be something that we'll focus on all summer.
Okay, great. So it sounds like it's kind of, it's not a regular activity. And when it does occur, it's typically overtime officers that are doing the bicycle patrol. Is that right?
For the most part. In the past, what we've done is use the school resource officers. And so
right.
if you know Officer Rob King, he's an avid cyclist.
Yeah.
And so we've assigned him in the past, in the summertime, just to do bike patrol.
Oh, okay.
Right now, the school resource officers are helping us with officers, our new officers that are in PTO. And so we have some additional trainers available to try and get them out on patrol.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Chief Harris and Jim, that was a really great presentation. It was really informative. As Councilmember Pascal said, you answered a lot of questions that I had and that I've heard from the community. So thank you. I mean, I think also a thank you is due to our brave officers who, as you mentioned earlier, are coming in with just such a sense of duty and service to our community during what I can imagine is a really challenging time to do the job that they do. So thank you to them, a huge thank you to them. I really appreciated the responsiveness the city's demonstrated with Chief Harris, you and Jim and the staff that he mentioned that worked so quickly on the compliment and complaint feedback to make it more visible on the website. That's some feedback that we received from the community, and to make that happen so quickly, I think really demonstrates our commitment as a city to be responsive, to really be as transparent as possible with the community. So I really, really appreciate that. Also appreciate the update on the Prop 1 funding with the PROACT unit and some of the other things you mentioned, in particular on the hiring of the mental health professional. I know that's something that, as you mentioned, Chief, is a really big need, and I can imagine that the need for this is just going to continue to grow with the growing mental health needs in our community during this time. So I'm really glad to hear that we're continuing to try to recruit for that position. I know it's been a tough position to recruit for, but thank you for not giving up on that and continuing to help fill that need in our city. I do have a question for you. Unfortunately, we've been hearing some reports in our neighboring cities of bias incidents and hate crimes happening during this time. And I'm wondering if we have any reports of any incidents in Kirkland. I don't necessarily need an answer now if you don't have that, but if we could get that information, because some folks in the community have been asking if we've had any bias incidents or hate crimes within the city of Kirkland during this time.
Yeah, I'll definitely double check. I can tell you that most of the time when that does happen, I am notified, and I have not heard of any crimes in Kirkland. But I'll double check just to make sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Good job.
Thank you.
No other questions? Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you all so much for your support.
I'm going to come back to my report, and I'm going to just have one slide for you. Sure I have the right one here. Okay, can everybody see that? It's a little text heavy, which I apologize, but I thought it'd be simpler so I don't forget to mention some things here. All right, so tonight I want to just give you a COVID-19 update that's related to budget and CIP in particular, but also happy to answer any questions on anything else related to COVID going on right now in the city. Before I jump into this, because this is the harder news, I want to say that we did have some very good news last week just after this packet went to bed, which is, I think as most of you know, the Governor Inslee made the decision to go ahead and pass through considerable amounts of money to local jurisdictions under a population of $500,000. And so they made a decision to allocate that money on a per capita basis of $30 per capita. And so for the city of Kirkland, that means we may be entitled to $2.6 million of money from the CARES Act, which can be forwarded on to the city of Kirkland. The city is evaluating the information we have so far. There's a couple things that are important to note. One is that money cannot be used to replace lost revenue, and all of the money needs to be used for things that are related to COVID-19, either preparation or actions or staffing that will help with COVID-19. So there's a fairly long list of what that could be, and so one of the things that the emergency manager has been doing as part of this, our period of uncertainty planning, our PUP group, that I mentioned in the memo, has been planning what do we think the city might need over the next 6 to 9 months to the end of the year. The money can only be used between now and the end of the year. And then also, how can we use it to help the community? So one of the opportunities with this is we can use this money to help human services agencies, and we can use this money to help the Small Business Relief Fund. So we're trying to evaluate all these needs pretty quickly and then come to the council with a recommendation as to how we might propose to allocate the money in these sort of 3 buckets of city needs, small business needs, and human services needs. So trying to get that done quickly but thoughtfully, because again, it's all on a reimbursement basis, so you have to spend the money first before you can get it back. And so we want to make sure that we know exactly what the opportunities and the restrictions are. So more to come on that, but that's very, very good news. It'll be really helpful to our community and helpful to the city. What I want to do next is just go ahead and move to this slide. There was a fairly more detailed memo about this in your packet, but for the general public, this is really to begin to tee up the conversation we're going to have at the council retreat on May 29th. And, many people are hearing from some pretty difficult choices that are being faced by our surrounding neighbors, Mercer Island and Issaquah and Bothell and Redmond, and reductions in layoffs and some challenges that people face. We are very fortunate that over the last many decades and past councils and the current council, we've been very conservative in our budgeting, and we have strong reserves, and we have some opportunities to blunt those kinds of actions. But if we don't take some action now, practical, prudent actions, we could be in a similar spot in several months as the COVID issue continues. So some current budget strategies that we're doing immediately is I have frozen temporary employee vacancies and some ongoing vacancies. We've frozen out-of-state travel and training for 2020. We're in the process of developing a voluntary separation agreement to encourage anyone who's able to go ahead and leave the government or to do early retirement to have them do so, which will save the city money. We're also looking at all of the ways in which we send general fund money to different categories that are not related to people. So the list here, I'll just read it fairly quickly. So we are pausing all of this. These are contributions that matter, and we'll talk more about them at the retreat as to why they matter. So this is not forever, but this might be for 2020 and 2021, or maybe even 2022 as well. But the idea is to free up that money to help us replace the lost revenue this year, which right now we're estimating at about $6 million, and that amount may grow. So we're going to be deferring contributions to our general fund reserves. We're going to be deferring contributions to our sinking fund reserves, which do things like help with facilities or purchase public safety equipment. We're going to be suspending general fund contributions to capital projects. That does not impact fees or real estate excise tax, but it would just be anything where it's a general fund dollar. We're looking at suspending general fund contributions to the fleet fund for the short term, delaying purchases of general fund replacement vehicles. And so what that means is if you're to buy a police vehicle or a fire vehicle, as an example, those come out of the general fund. But if you're to buy a Vector truck, those come out of utility rates and utility fees. So this doesn't apply to all vehicles, just vehicles that are in the general fund. We're also looking at delaying any equipment purchases that we can, or vehicle purchases or facility investments. So if they're not already underway and they're not immediately necessary and they use general fund dollars, we're going to pause those. And we'll have a more detailed list again at the retreat for you of the projects that will get paused. We're delaying some capital projects that are not yet in construction. Again, we'll have more details at the retreat. And we are also suspending professional service contracts that have general fund dollars that have not yet been executed. So we're going to go ahead and pause those. And then we're also working with our union partners to figure out ways that the union and the city can work together to help address some of these situations. Those are negotiations that will take place throughout the year. And finally, of course, if necessary, and we hope to avoid this, we could be looking at issues such as layoffs or furloughs. But we hope that by going through all the lists above first, we can avoid the last. And the main reason we want to avoid layoffs is because Kirkland is pretty thin, and almost everybody we have either provides direct service to the public or supports those who do. And so really layoffs mean a loss of service to our public. So we want to try to preserve service as much as possible. So let me pause on there before I go to the CIP strategy and just see if folks have any questions or want me to elaborate on any of that.
Seeing none.
Okay, thank you. And obviously I had a chance to talk to most of you on the phone today as well. So, and then finally on the CIP strategies, which was one of the primary focuses of the title, the reason we brought this up is that traditionally during the budget process, the council adopts some priorities for the CIP that sort of guide our CIP development in a normal process. And what I'm recommending to you this year is that we don't adopt such a resolution solely because things are changing so fast and the need to find money is pretty urgent. And we may also end up with issues such as a federal stimulus package that might fund infrastructure. And so we'll need to be extremely nimble around what we move and what we do. And so it sort of doesn't make sense to adopt a framework that may be obsolete right after you adopt it. So our suggestion is to stick with the principles we had last year that prioritize things such as public safety investments. There's a list which we'll talk about again at the retreat, and it's in the memo. But I want to just tell you right now what we're doing is we're really focusing on finishing what we started. So if there's projects underway, whether they be large or small, we're going to focus on those over the next 6 years versus starting any new projects. And then we're really going to be limiting in 21, 22 any major new projects and really turn our attention to much smaller, small but nimble investments that'll be different than these large parks projects and street projects that we've been doing in the past. So a big shift for us, but necessary given the financial situation that we're in. So any questions on the CIP? Or any comments on not adopting a resolution at this point this year?
Looks like none.
So the last thing I'll say, and I'll be done with this topic, is we have one really big COVID impact discussion with the council to have at our next council meeting before the retreat, and that's the impact of the governor's decisions on COVID on the Parks Department. So I've talked about this a little bit leading up, but we have some definite policy decisions to make at the next council meeting about what we think our summer programs should be, if any, given the need to comply with the governor's 4-phase plan. The leadership of the Parks Department has been meeting since that announcement last week. They had some meetings yesterday and today. I'll be meeting with Lynn Zwagstra, the Parks Director, tomorrow and try to develop some options for the council. But it does look like, for sure, it'll be very difficult to have any programs in June and July, and certainly no special events. And then also we'll be looking at whether it's possible to consider those in August. So we'll be bringing all those to the council in sort of a package of discussion items at the next council meeting because you forgo a lot of revenue when you don't have them, but there's also a lot of liability issues and other things. And of course, just the ability to comply with the governor's directive. So no one wants to not provide these services to the public, but whether we can provide them safely or in compliance is really the issue we're looking at. So a lot of issues around parks to come. Just wanted to give you the teaser, and we'll be talking more about that specifically at the next council meeting.
Kurt, I do have a question about that. As Lynn and her crew are thinking about this, I'm just thinking about all of the poor moms and dads that are at home, trying to figure out how to fill their kids' days and do work and do all the rest of this stuff. And I hope we're at least thinking about maybe doing some kind of even online fun things for kids where we can have 250 kids on a Zoom call doing something with a staff or two in the gym. I don't know. But it seems to me like we need to be as creative as we can to help people through this. And, obviously we wouldn't charge them for it, but I think if there's ways that we can provide some level of relief, it would be really, really good thing for us to do.
Well, thank you for that comment, Mayor. The department is looking at exactly those kinds of things. One of the things that Lynn was very excited about was sort of the creativity that they were bringing for things like that. They're talking, for example, about possibly could have a virtual 3K where everybody runs the route on their own and posts their time, or the geocaching and some of the other stuff. So they are really trying to get creative and bring some new thinking to programs they might be able to provide. And so that part's exciting, but then there's also the financial challenge that's resulting with all of this as well. So complex, the Parks Department issues are going to be really complex. That's why we're going to devote a lot of time to them at the next council meeting. But thank you for that comment. Okay, that's all I have on COVID. So unless there's any last questions. All right, thank you so much.
Anything. Okay, so that takes us to the consent calendar. Before we have a motion, I'd like to ask Deputy Mayor to present an audit of the accounts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We had payroll in the amount of $4,334,434.73 and bills in the amount of $5,704,142.09.